Hi guys. So, as we know, Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party, was basically kicked out of the party recently because of allegations coming out of an inquiry and his reaction to that. Now, his supporters within the party were not very happy with the way he was treated after the general election. They were not happy, definitely not happy with the way he was treated recently, where he had the whip removed and basically expelled from the party. And they are angry with someone, and this someone seems to be Keir Starmer. Now, there's an interesting article here from The Guardian. It says, Starmer should apologise for Labour's Brexit position, say ex-shadow ministers. Frontbenchers under Jeremy Corbyn say promise to seek another referendum angered Labour voters. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here because it's been a year almost, but it seems like a decade ago. So what happened? In the run-up to the general election, Boris Johnson was in a tight position. He had lost his majority. The Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, remember the Liberal Democrats, anyone? The Green Party, all of them were considering forming a coalition of a government of national unity in a coalition. And there was a back and forth between the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and the head of the Liberal Democrats. And the Liberal Democrats refused to allow Jeremy Corbyn to be the leader of this new coalition. Jeremy Corbyn's supporters within the Labour Party were very adamant that he would be, the leader of this coalition. So there was a back and forth. And during that time, Boris Johnson was trying to push things through Parliament, and he was failing. He was being undermined by his minority in Parliament. And Brexit was continuing to boil. And of course, people wanted Brexit to be over and done with. And what happened was, through a number of different measures, there was an election. I'm not going to go into details about that, but there was an election. Boris Johnson ran on the campaign message of "Get Brexit Done," of course, with the focus group mechanisms developed by Dominic Cummings to understand what people want, or to convince people what they really want. And of course, the idea behind it was, a simple slogan: "Get Brexit done." I can get Brexit done. The Labour Party can't. The Labour Party then decided, okay, what should we do? And I was very critical of them at the time. I said, look, what they wanted to do was to have a second referendum, but they wouldn't campaign to remain. And I criticized it at the time. I said, okay, well, first of all, you need to win the election, or at least you need to form a coalition and then put forward a second referendum. But you can't take a position. You have to take a position on the referendum before you have it. And there was this idea within the Labour Party, and Jeremy Corbyn, when he was still leader, he was asked on a number of occasions, would you support a second referendum? And he was saying, yes, we'd support a second referendum. He was sort of dragged, kicking and screaming, towards that side, because he is or was, I don't know which verb we should use, which tense we should use, but he was a Brexiteer. Not the Brexiteer in the same sense as Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage, but he was, during his career, he was extremely critical of the European Union, and he would prefer the UK to be outside. Now, his position officially has changed somewhat since that time, but I've never been really convinced by the idea that he supported remaining in the European Union. But anyway, there was the idea of having a second referendum, and then the Labour Party wouldn't campaign to remain or to leave. Now, I criticised that at the time because I said, look, you need, first of all, to win, and then you can talk about having a second referendum. The problem was that they were saying, yes, we're going to have a second referendum, and we'll decide when we have a referendum whether we want to stay or leave. And then they were also talking about having their own trade deal. We're going to have our own negotiating team that will go to Brussels. And I think this just created a lot of confusion. They had painted themselves into a corner because they were afraid of pissing off Labour voters who supported Brexit. They were also afraid of pissing off voters who voted Remain. The Conservatives didn't really have that problem. The Conservatives became the party of Brexit. So everyone was pretty much on the same page. There were a few, people outside who were Remainers, but they had no real power. The real power was concentrated around Boris Johnson and the idea of Brexit. We are supportive of Brexit, and we will get Brexit done. And that slogan won out at the end of the day. People voted on a message, not so much on policy. And unfortunately, Boris Johnson was returned with a massive majority. Now, whose fault was that? The centre within the Labour Party would say it was Jeremy Corbyn's fault because he was, uncharismatic. He had a lot of baggage. He turned people off. And I think there is a huge value in that. There was, many people said, I like the Labour Party policies. I don't like the leader. I don't want this guy to be our next Prime Minister. That has changed with Keir Starmer. A lot of people who were critical of Jeremy Corbyn are more supportive of Keir Starmer now, which is interesting. So it does buy into the idea that it was the leader who was the problem. But I do believe that the position that the Labour Party had on Brexit was extremely confusing and nonsensical. The idea that, yes, vote us in, then we'll have our team that will go to the European Union, then we'll call for a second referendum, even though we don't know if we'll have a majority or not. And then we will decide whether we will support remaining in the European Union or we will support leaving. So how can you convince people that you're going to have a successful withdrawal agreement, in a sense? That's what Boris Johnson was selling to people. The oven-ready deal was basically the withdrawal agreement. The Labour Party were saying, well, we're going to have our own withdrawal agreement. It'll be better than Boris Johnson's, and we're going to be able to do it in the time frame necessary. Okay, there were a lot of what ifs, and that was, I think, a bit confusing for many people. And you have to remember that most people who vote are not political junkies. They're not like me or like you that are listening to this. We're following these things on a daily basis. Most people are not, and they don't have the time or the interest to read up on these things or to understand the nuances, or why is Boris Johnson saying this and why is Sir Keir Starmer or Jeremy Corbyn saying that, and they don't look at the policies or the conflict. They just look at the slogans in many cases, and I'm not criticizing completely people for that. I understand people have their own lives and politics is not really their interest. They just turn up and vote when the time comes. And many people don't understand Brexit. And I think the vast majority of people don't understand Brexit. So I think the idea of turning now to blame Keir Starmer for the disaster of the Labour Party policy, yes, there is a certain amount of blame to be laid at his door, but I think at the end of the day, it's the leader of the party that has to take the responsibility. And the leader at the time was Jeremy Corbyn. Now, that goes both ways. Going forward, the mistakes, or if there are going to be any mistakes made by the Labour Party, the current leader, Keir Starmer, has to take responsibility for that. So I don't think these things are very helpful. I understand that the Labour Party is going through a phase at the moment, and there's a lot of conflict within the party about which direction they want to take the country, take the party and take the country. And I think, there are more challenges on the horizon, for example, next year with the Scottish independence. It's basically Scottish independence that people are voting on next May. It's the general election in Scotland, the Parliament election in Scotland, I should say. But it is basically a referendum on a referendum. People are deciding in this election next year whether they want to support a referendum on independence or not. And the Labour Party position on Scottish independence is problematic, to say the least. And I think the leader has to take responsibility for that too. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.